The air in Willow Creek, a sleepy coastal town in Northern California, carried the faint tang of salt and pine, mingling with the damp chill of autumn 2012. Nestled between jagged cliffs and a restless Pacific Ocean, the town was a patchwork of weathered clapboard houses, a single diner with flickering neon signs, and a lighthouse that hadn't guided a ship in decades. To outsiders, it was a postcard of quaint isolation, a place where time seemed to pause. But beneath its serene surface, Willow Creek harbored secrets that festered in the silences between neighbors, in the boarded-up windows of abandoned homes, and in the hearts of those who called it home. The center of this story was Evelyn Harper, a 42-year-old widow who had returned to Willow Creek 3 years prior, in 2009, after a decade in San Francisco. Evelyn was a striking figure, with sharp green eyes and auburn hair that caught the light like embers. She had inherited her parents' sprawling Victorian home on Cliffside Lane, a creaking relic perched on a bluff overlooking the ocean. The house, with its peeling paint and sagging porch, was both a sanctuary and a burden. Evelyn had left behind a career as a graphic designer to restore it, pouring her savings into new shingles, refinished floors, and a garden that bloomed defiantly against the salty wind. To the townsfolk, she was an enigma, a woman who kept to herself, who smiled politely at the grocery store but never lingered for small talk. Some admired her resilience. Others whispered about the tragedy that had driven her back to Willow Creek. Evelyn's husband, Daniel, had died in a car accident in 2008, a head-on collision on a rain-slicked highway outside San Francisco. The official report cited a drunk driver, but Evelyn had never spoken of it, not to her neighbors, not to the pastor who stopped by with casseroles, not even to her younger sister, Clara, who lived in Seattle. The loss had carved something out of Evelyn, leaving her quieter, more guarded. She threw herself into her work on the house, as if each nail driven into the wood could anchor her to something solid. But the townsfolk noticed the way her hands trembled when she paid for her coffee at the diner, the way her eyes darted to the shadows at dusk. In the spring of 2012, Evelyn hired a local handyman, Caleb Monroe, to help with the heavier renovations. Caleb was 28, with a lean build, sun-bleached hair, and a disarming grin that made him a favorite at the local bar, the Rusty Anchor. He was a drifter of sorts, having bounced between odd jobs in Willow Creek for the past 5 years, fixing boats, painting houses, hauling lumber. His charm masked a restless edge, a hunger for something more than the town could offer. Caleb's mother, Lorraine, was a fixture in Willow Creek, a retired schoolteacher who volunteered at the library and knitted blankets for the church bazaar. Lorraine doted on Caleb, her only child, but even she admitted he was hard to pin down. Evelyn and Caleb's working relationship began professionally enough. He arrived at the Victorian each morning at 7, his toolbox clanking, and spent hours repairing the roof or sanding down the banisters. Evelyn would bring him iced tea on the porch, and they'd exchange polite conversation about the weather or the progress of the work. But as the weeks turned to months, a quiet intimacy grew between them. Caleb lingered longer in the evenings, telling stories of his travels along the coast, while Evelyn shared fragments of her life in San Francisco, her love for jazz, her habit of sketching wildflowers in her notebook. She began to trust him, to let him see the cracks in her carefully composed exterior. By summer, rumors swirled through Willow Creek. At the diner, locals speculated over plates of pancakes about the city woman and the handyman. Lorraine, protective of her son, dismissed the gossip with a wave of her hand, but her eyes betrayed worry. She knew Caleb had a history of fleeting romances, of leaving broken hearts in his wake. Evelyn, too, sensed the town's scrutiny. She started closing her curtains at night, avoiding the curious stares of passers-by. But she couldn't deny the warmth she felt when Caleb's hand brushed hers while passing a hammer, or the way his laugh seemed to lighten the weight she carried at IN. August 2012, Evelyn's sister, Clara, visited for a week. Clara was 35, a high school biology teacher with a no-nonsense demeanor and a habit of speaking her mind. She noticed the change in Evelyn immediately. The way her sister's face lit up when Caleb stopped by to check on a leaky pipe. The way she seemed to come alive in his presence. Clara was skeptical of Caleb, wary of his easy charm. "He's too young for you, Evie," she said one evening, stirring sugar into her tea at the kitchen table. "And he's got that look, like he's always halfway out the door." Evelyn laughed it off, insisting they were just friends, but Clara's words lingered on the night of August 12, 2012. Clara woke to a strange sound, a low, rhythmic thumping, coming from the attic. She crept upstairs, flashlight in hand, expecting to find a loose shutter or a raccoon. Instead, she found nothing but dusty trunks and cobwebs. The next morning, she mentioned it to Evelyn, who brushed it off as the house settling. But Clara couldn't shake the feeling that something was off. She noticed Caleb's truck parked outside the house late at night, long after he was supposed to have left. When she confronted Evelyn, her sister admitted that Caleb had been staying over occasionally, helping with late-night repairs. Clara pressed her for details, but Evelyn grew defensive, insisting it was her life to live. Clara left Willow Creek on August 15th, uneasy but unable to pinpoint why. She called Evelyn every few days, checking in, but the calls grew shorter, Evelyn's voice more distant. By September, Evelyn stopped answering altogether. Clara assumed her sister was busy, caught up in the renovations, or perhaps pulling away. Intentionally. She didn't want to seem overbearing, so she let it slide, promising herself she'd visit again soon. On October 3rd, 2012, a jogger named Tom Reynolds, a retired firefighter who lived on Cliffside Lane, noticed something odd while passing Evelyn's house. The garden, usually meticulous, was overgrown with weeds. The mailbox was stuffed with uncollected letters. Tom knocked on the door, but no one answered. He peered through the front window and saw the living room in disarray, furniture askew, a lamp overturned. Alarmed, he called the Willow Creek Sheriff's Department. Sheriff Laura Bennett, a 20-year veteran with a no-nonsense demeanor, arrived within the hour. She found the front door unlocked, which was unusual for Evelyn, who was known to be cautious. Inside, the house was eerily silent. The air smelled of mildew and something sharper, metallic. In the kitchen, Bennett noticed a coffee mug on the counter, its contents long since evaporated. Upstairs, in Evelyn's bedroom, the bed was unmade, a rarity for someone so orderly. But it was in the attic that Bennett's heart sank. A trapdoor in the ceiling hung open, and a faint, rancid odor wafted down. Bennett called for backup, and deputies Mark Torres and Sarah Nguyen arrived with a forensic team. In the attic, they found a large wooden trunk, its lid ajar. Inside was Evelyn Harper's body, wrapped in a tarp. Her auburn hair was matted with blood, and her face bore the marks of blunt trauma. The coroner later determined she had been dead for at least 3 weeks, killed by multiple blows to the head with a heavy object, likely a hammer. The attic's isolation had kept the smell contained, explaining why no one had noticed sooner. The discovery sent shockwaves through Willow Creek. Evelyn had been a private woman, but she was well-liked, her death a violation of the town's unspoken sense of safety. Sheriff Bennett launched an immediate investigation, starting with the last people known to have seen Evelyn. Clara, contacted in Seattle, was devastated, her guilt over not pushing harder to stay in touch gnawing at her. She flew to Willow Creek the next day, demanding answers. Suspicion quickly fell on Caleb Monroe. His truck had been seen at Evelyn's house the night before Clara left, and neighbors reported hearing raised voices from the property in mid-September. When questioned, Caleb claimed he hadn't seen Evelyn since September 10th, when he'd finished repairing a window frame. He said he'd been working odd jobs across town and staying at his mother's house. Lorraine backed his story, insisting Caleb had been with her most evenings. But Bennett noticed inconsistencies, gaps in Caleb's timeline, a nervousness in his eyes when pressed about his relationship with Evelyn. The investigation deepened. Forensic analysis revealed traces of Evelyn's blood on a hammer in Caleb's toolbox, which he kept in his truck. Fibers from the tarp in the attic matched. A roll found in a shed behind Lorraine's house. When confronted, Caleb broke down, admitting he and Evelyn had been romantically involved. He claimed it was consensual, a secret they kept to avoid gossip. But he insisted he hadn't killed her, saying he'd last seen her alive and well. The hammer, he said, must have been contaminated during his work at the house. Clara, however, provided a new angle. She told Bennett about a conversation she'd overheard between Caleb and Evelyn on August 14th, the night before she left. Caleb had been pressing Evelyn to sell the Victorian, arguing it was too much for her to maintain alone. Evelyn had refused, saying the house was her legacy, her connection to her parents. Clara recalled Caleb's tone, frustrated, almost desperate. She also mentioned Evelyn's life insurance policy, worth $500,000, which named Clara as the beneficiary. Clara wondered if Caleb had known about it, if he'd seen Evelyn as a means to an end. The police dug into Caleb's finances. He was drowning, in debt, credit card bills, a loan for a boat he'd never paid off, and gambling losses from trips to Reno. A search of his phone revealed texts to a friend, dated September 8th, where he mentioned a big payout coming soon. The friend, a bartender named Jake Hollis, told police Caleb had bragged about getting out of this dump town with money from a rich lady. Jake assumed it was a joke, but the texts painted a darker picture that on October 10th, Caleb was arrested and charged with Evelyn's murder. The town was divided. Some believed Caleb was a monster, others thought he'd been framed, a convenient scapegoat for a town desperate for closure. Lorraine hired a lawyer, insisting her son was innocent, that he'd never hurt anyone. She pointed to Evelyn's past, suggesting her time in San Francisco might have left enemies, perhaps someone from her husband's accident who blamed her. But the evidence against Caleb was mounting to the trial, which began in June 2013. The prosecution painted Caleb as a calculating opportunist. They argued he'd seduced Evelyn to gain her trust, then killed her when she refused to sell the house or give him money. The hammer, the tarp fibers, and the text were damning. The defense countered that the evidence was circumstantial, that Caleb's deaths were no different from those of half the town. They suggested an unknown intruder, pointing to the lack of fingerprints on the murder weapon and the unlocked front door that a key witness emerged. Maggie Teller, a 60-year-old neighbor who lived across the street. Maggie testified that on September 15, around midnight, she'd seen a figure in a hooded jacket leaving Evelyn's house. She couldn't identify the person, but noted they moved quickly, carrying a bag. The defense seized on this, arguing it could have been someone else. But Maggie's testimony was shaky. She'd been half asleep, her glasses off. The jury wasn't swayed. The trial's turning point came when Clara took the stand. She spoke of Evelyn's loneliness, her need for connection after Daniel's death. She described finding a sketch in Evelyn's notebook, dated September 5th, of a man resembling Caleb, with the words, "I'm scared," scrawled beneath. Clara broke down, saying she should have stayed, should have protected her sister. The courtroom was silent, the weight of her grief palpable that on July 2nd, 2013, Caleb Monroe was convicted of first-degree murder and sentenced to life without parole. He maintained his innocence, his eyes hollow as he was led away. Lorraine collapsed. In the courtroom, sobbing, while Clara stood motionless, staring at the floor. The town tried to move on, but Evelyn's death left a scar. Her house sat empty, the garden reclaimed by weeds, the Victorians' windows dark against the cliffside, yet questions lingered. A week after the trial, Tom Reynolds, the jogger, found a rusted locket half buried in the sand near the lighthouse. Inside was a photo of Evelyn and Daniel taken years before. How it ended up there, no one knew. Clara kept it, a final piece of her sister. Some in Willow Creek whispered that the truth wasn't fully uncovered, that the shadows of the town held more secrets. But for now, the case was closed, and Evelyn Harper's story became another tale whispered over coffee at the diner. A reminder that even in a place as quiet as Willow Creek, darkness could take root. In the heart of Lancashire, England, the village of Eldermore was a place where time seemed to have stopped. Nestled in a valley cradled by rolling hills and ancient stone walls, its cobbled streets wound past ivy-clad cottages and a medieval church whose bells tolled with a mournful clarity. By the autumn of 2014, Eldermore's population barely reached 2,000, a tight-knit community where everyone knew each other's names, habits, and secrets, or so they thought. The village was known for its annual choral festival, a tradition dating back centuries, where voices rose in harmony under the church's vaulted ceiling. But in 2014, the festival would be overshadowed by a darkness that would unravel the village's fragile peace. The center of this story was Margaret Maggie Ellison, a 58-year-old widow who had lived in Eldermore her entire life. Maggie was a pillar of the community, a soprano in the Eldermore Choral Society, whose voice could silence a room with its clarity. Her graying hair was always neatly pinned, her smile warm but reserved, and her eyes carried a quiet sorrow sense. Her husband, Thomas, died of cancer in 2009. Maggie lived in a modest cottage on Rose Lane, its garden bursting with roses she tended with devotion. She taught piano lessons to local children, her patience legendary, and organized the choral festival with a meticulous hand, ensuring every hymn was perfect. Maggie's closest friend was Beatrice Langley, a 60-year-old retired librarian who lived 2 doors down. Beatrice was the opposite of Maggie, brash, opinionated, with a laugh that echoed through the village pub, the Black Hare. The 2 women had known each other since childhood, their bond forged through shared secrets and countless evenings sipping tea by Maggie's hearth. Beatrice, unmarried and childless, treated Maggie's daughter, Sophie, like her own. Sophie, 32, had moved to Manchester in 2010 to work as a nurse, leaving Maggie alone in the cottage. Though Sophie visited often, her absence left a void in Maggie's life, one she filled with music and community. In the spring of 2014, a newcomer arrived in Eldermore, Julian Carver, a 40-year-old composer from London. Julian was tall, with sharp cheekbones and dark eyes that seemed to see through people. He rented a small flat above the village bakery, claiming he'd come to Eldermore for inspiration, drawn by its quiet beauty and the choral festival's reputation. His arrival caused a stir. Strangers were rare in Eldermore, and Julian's polished manners and city accent set him apart. He joined the choral society, his baritone voice a rich addition to the choir, and quickly won over its members with his charm and talent. Maggie, in particular, was captivated. Julian would linger after rehearsals, discussing music theory with her or praising her voice, and she began to blush at his compliments, a spark of youth returning to her eyes. By summer, Julian had become a regular at Maggie's cottage, helping her arrange sheet music for the festival or sharing glasses of wine on her patio. Beatrice, however, was wary. She noticed the way Julian's gaze lingered on Maggie, the way he seemed to know too much about her routines, her favorite hymns, even the anniversary of Thomas's death. "He's too smooth, Maggie," Beatrice warned one evening, her voice sharp over a pot of stew. "He's got no roots here. What's he really after?" Maggie laughed, dismissing her friend's concerns. She felt alive in Julian's presence, as if the years of grief had begun to lift. As the choral festival approached in September, tensions simmered in Eldermore. The festival was a point of pride, drawing visitors from neighboring towns and even a few music critics from London. Maggie threw herself into preparations, but her behavior began to change. She grew secretive, canceling piano lessons without explanation and missing choir rehearsals. Beatrice noticed Maggie's garden, once pristine, was neglected, the roses wilting under an early frost. When pressed, Maggie admitted she'd been spending more time with Julian, working on a new composition he claimed would be the festival's centerpiece, a requiem dedicated to Thomas, Sophie, visiting for a weekend. In early September, sensed something amiss. She found a stack of unpaid bills on Maggie's kitchen counter, unusual for her meticulous mother. She also noticed a new locket around Maggie's neck, a silver piece engraved with a rose, which Maggie said was a gift from Julian. Sophie confronted her mother, asking why she was letting a stranger so close. "He understands me," Maggie said, her voice trembling. "He's not like the rest of you, always pitying me." Sophie left the conversation unsettled, promising to return for the festival on September 28th. On the morning of September 20th, 2014, Beatrice knocked on Maggie's door, carrying a basket of scones. The cottage was silent, the curtains drawn. Worried, Beatrice let herself in with a spare key Maggie had given her years ago. Inside, the air was stale, the furniture untouched. In the living room, she found Maggie's piano open, sheet music scattered across the floor. A half-empty bottle of wine sat on the coffee table, two glasses beside it, one smudged with lipstick. Beatrice's heart raced as she climbed the stairs to Maggie's bedroom. The bed was unmade, a rarity for Maggie, and her phone lay on the nightstand, its battery dead. Beatrice called the Lancashire Constabulary, and Constable Daniel Hargreaves arrived within the hour. A stocky man with a calm demeanor, Hargreaves knew Maggie from church and took Beatrice's concern seriously. He noted the signs of a struggle: overturned chairs in the dining room, a shattered teacup in the kitchen. In the backyard, he found a patch of disturbed soil near the rose garden, as if someone had been digging. Hargreaves called for a forensic team, and by evening, the cottage was cordoned off. The search uncovered a grim truth. Beneath the rose garden, wrapped in a tarpaulin, was Maggie Ellison's body. Her face was bruised, her throat marked by strangulation. The coroner later determined she'd been dead for at least 5 days, killed by manual strangulation, with traces of sedatives in her system. The news stunned Eldermore. Maggie, the village's heart, was gone, her death a betrayal of the community's trust. The investigation focused on Julian Carver. He was the last person seen with Maggie, spotted leaving her cottage on September 15th, according to a neighbor, Mrs. Agnes Poole. When questioned, Julian claimed he'd been in Manchester that week, visiting a music publisher. He provided receipts and a train ticket, but Hargreaves noticed inconsistencies, dates that didn't align, a nervous tick in Julian's jaw. A search of his flat revealed a notebook with sketches of Maggie's cottage, including a detailed map of the garden and a vial of sedatives hidden in a drawer. Beatrice, distraught but determined, shared her suspicions with Hargreaves. She recalled a conversation with Maggie in late August, where Maggie had mentioned Julian asking about her savings. Maggie had laughed it off, saying she'd never trust anyone with her money, but Beatrice wondered if Julian had been probing for more. Bank records showed Maggie had withdrawn £10,000 in cash 2 weeks before her death, money that was now missing. Sophie, returning to Eldermore, revealed that Maggie had confided in her about a life insurance policy worth £200,000, naming Sophie as the beneficiary. Had Julian known, the police dug into Julian's past. He wasn't a composer from London, but a con artist named Julian Carter, with a history of fraud in Bristol and Leeds. He'd targeted wealthy widows before, charming them before vanishing with their savings. In Eldermore, he'd seen Maggie as an easy mark, a lonely widow with a valuable cottagesso. But the sedatives and the disturbed soil suggested a darker motive. Had Julian planned to kill Maggie, perhaps to cover his tracks or to ensure the insurance payout? At the trial in March 2015, the prosecution painted Julian as a predator who'd manipulated Maggie's trust, drugged her with sedatives, and strangled her when she refused to hand over her savings. They presented the notebook, the sedatives, and testimony from a Manchester bookshop owner who contradicted Julian's alibi, saying he'd never visited. The defense argued the evidence was circumstantial, suggesting the sedatives could have been Maggie's, prescribed for insomnia. They pointed to a local teenager, Ethan Wells, who'd been caught stealing from the church collection box, as a possible suspect. The pivotal moment came when Beatrice testified. She described finding a hidden letter in Maggie's piano bench, written days before her death. In it, Maggie expressed fear that Julian was not what he seems, hinting at discovering something about his past. The letter, combined with forensic evidence, traces of Maggie's DNA on Julian's coat, sealed his fate. On April 10, 2015, Julian Carver was convicted of murder and sentenced to life imprisonment. Eldermore mourned Maggie, her absence felt in every silent note of the choral festival. Sophie kept the silver locket, wearing it as a reminder of her mother's warmth. Yet, in the quiet of Rose Lane, whispers persisted. A groundskeeper found a buried tin near the church containing a forged bank transfer document in Maggie's name. Was Julian working alone, or was there another player in Eldermore's shadows? For now, the village sang on, its harmony forever tinged with loss. Nestled in the dense forests of northern Minnesota, the town of Blackthorn was a place where the pines whispered secrets to those who dared listen. By the autumn of 2016, its population hovered just under 3,000, a community of loggers, shopkeepers, and retirees who clung to the rhythms of a life shaped by long winters and fleeting summers. The town's heart was its sawmill, a hulking relic from the early 20th century, its rhythmic hum a constant backdrop to daily life. Blackthorn streets were lined with clapboard houses, their paint chipped by years of frost, and at the edge of town stood the Pineview Lodge, a rustic inn that drew hunters and tourists seeking solitude. But in 2016, Blackthorn would become a place where solitude turned sinister, and the pines bore witness to a crime that would shatter the town's quiet. The center of this story was Nora Lindstrom, a 47-year-old widow who had run the Pineview Lodge since her husband, Eric, died in a logging accident in 2010. Nora was a striking woman, with pale blue eyes that seemed to hold the weight of the forest itself and silver-streaked blonde hair she wore in a loose braid. She was known for her resilience, managing the lodge single-handedly while raising her teenage son, Lucas, who was 17 and a senior at Blackthorn High. The lodge, with its creaking wooden floors and stone fireplace, was Nora's pride, a haven for weary travelers and locals alike. She greeted guests with a warm smile, served strong coffee, and kept a ledger of every visitor, her meticulous handwriting a testament to her need for order in a life marked by loss. Nora's closest confidant was Ingrid Olsen, a 50-year-old nurse who worked at the town's clinic. Ingrid was a stout woman with a sharp wit and a habit of bringing homemade lingonberry jam to the lodge, where she and Nora would sit by the fire, trading stories. Ingrid had known Eric, too, and after his death, she became Nora's anchor, checking in on her and Lucas weekly. Lucas, however, was a different story. He was a quiet boy, tall and lanky, with his father's dark hair and a penchant for sketching the pines that surrounded Blackthorn. He spent hours in the forest, his sketchbook filled with intricate drawings of trees and wildlife. But he struggled to connect with his peers, his shyness often mistaken for aloofness. In the spring of 2016, a stranger arrived in Blackthorn. Victor, pale, a 35-year-old photographer from Minneapolis. Victor was lean, with a scruffy beard and eyes that darted like a fox's, always observing. He checked into the Pineview Lodge, claiming he was working on a photo series about rural America, drawn to Blackthorn's untouched wilderness. His camera was a constant companion, slung around his neck as he wandered the town, snapping shots of the sawmill, the frozen lake, and the pines. Victor's charm was disarming. He'd tip his hat to locals, buy rounds at the Timberline bar, and ask questions about Blackthorn's history with a curiosity that felt genuine. Nora took a liking to him, offering him a discounted rate to stay at the lodge through the summer. Victor, in turn, praised her hospitality, leaving generous tips and small gifts, like a framed photo of the lodge at sunrise by June. Victor had become a fixture in Blackthorn. He joined the town's historical society, attended potlucks, and even helped Nora repaint the lodge's porch. Locals noticed the way Nora's face lit up when Victor lingered at the front desk, the way she laughed at his stories of traveling through Montana or Maine. Ingrid, however, was skeptical. She'd seen men like Victor before, smooth talkers who breezed into small towns, stirring up trouble before vanishing. "He's got no roots, Nora," she said one evening, stirring cream into her coffee. "What's a city boy doing out here?" Anyway, Nora brushed it off, insisting Victor was just a guest, but her eyes betrayed a flicker of something deeper. Lucas, too, noticed the change in his mother. He'd catch her humming while polishing the lodge's silverware, a habit she'd abandoned after Eric's death. But he also saw Victor watching her, his gaze lingering too long when she wasn't looking. Lucas didn't trust him. One afternoon in July, he found Victor in the lodge's basement, rummaging through old guest ledgers. When confronted, Victor claimed he was researching Blackthorn's history for his project. But Lucas noticed a page torn from the 2015 ledger, now missing. He told Nora, who dismissed it as an accident. But Lucas began sketching Victor in his notebook, his pencil strokes sharp with suspicion. As summer faded into autumn, Nora grew secretive. She started locking the lodge's office, where she kept her financial records, and stopped inviting Ingrid over for tea. The lodge's books showed declining revenue, fewer tourists, rising maintenance costs, but Nora seemed unconcerned, even as bills piled up. Lucas overheard her arguing with someone on the phone late at night, her voice low and tense. When he asked, she said it was a supplier, but her hands trembled as she poured his morning cereal. On September 10th, 2016, Ingrid stopped by the lodge with a jar of jam, only to find it eerily quiet. The front desk was unmanned, the fireplace cold. She called out for Nora, but the only sound was the creak of the pines outside. Worried, Ingrid checked the guest rooms, finding Victor's belongings still in room 12, though he was nowhere to be seen. In Nora's office, she found the ledger open, a recent entry circled in red, a $15,000 bank transfer to an account labeled VH. Ingrid's stomach churned. She called Lucas, who was at school, and he rushed home, his face pale with fear. Sheriff Paul Grayson, a grizzled man in his late 50s, arrived with Deputy Anna Kessler. They found signs of a struggle in Nora's private quarters, a toppled lamp, a broken picture frame of Nora and Eric. In the backyard, near the pine grove, Kessler noticed a patch of freshly turned earth hidden beneath a pile of leaves. The forensic team was called in, and by dusk, they unearthed Nora Lindstrom's body, wrapped in a canvas sheet. Her skull was fractured, the result of a heavy blow, and her wrists bore ligature marks, suggesting she'd been restrained. The coroner estimated she'd been dead for 3 days, killed on September 7. Blackthorn reeled. Nora was the town's heartbeat, her lodge a refuge. Her death felt like a betrayal, a crack in the foundation of their community. Lucas was inconsolable, moving in with Ingrid while the investigation unfolded. Grayson focused on Victor Hale, who'd vanished the day after Nora's estimated time of death. His room at the lodge was empty, his camera and laptop gone, but a search revealed a hidden compartment in his suitcase containing Nora's missing ledger page and a vial of crushed sedatives. The police traced Victor's movements. He'd rented a car in Duluth on September 8th, which was found abandoned near the Canadian border, its trunk stained with traces of Nora's blood. Bank records showed the $15,000 transfer to an account in Victor's name, withdrawn in cash the day he disappeared. A deeper dive into his past revealed a pattern. Victor, whose real name was Vincent Howell, had a history of fraud in 3 states, targeting small businesses and vulnerable women. In Montana, he'd swindled a hotel owner out of $20,000. In Maine, he'd left a widow bankrupt. Blackthorn had been his latest mark, and Nora his target. Ingrid provided a crucial lead. She recalled Nora mentioning a life insurance policy worth $250,000, taken out after Eric's death, with Lucas as the beneficiary. Had Victor learned of it? A search of his laptop, recovered from a pawn shop in Duluth, revealed searches for life insurance payouts and Minnesota probate law. Emails to an unknown contact mentioned a big score and a plan to disappear north. On September 20th, Victor was tracked to a motel in Thunder Bay, Canada. He was arrested after a brief standoff, his camera bag stuffed with cash and Nora's gold bracelet, a family heirloom. During interrogation, he claimed Nora had given him the money willingly, part of a business deal to fund his photo project. He denied killing her, saying he'd left Blackthorn after an argument over the lodge's future. But forensic evidence told a different story. Nora's blood on his jacket, pine needles matching those near her grave, and a hammer in his car. With her DNA, the trial began in May 2017. The prosecution painted Victor as a predator who'd seduced Nora to access her savings, killing her when she grew suspicious. They presented the ledger, the emails, and testimony from Lucas, who described finding a note in Nora's handwriting. Victor asked about the policy. "I don't trust him." The defense argued the evidence was circumstantial, suggesting Lucas, struggling with grief, might have lashed out at his mother. They pointed to his sketches of Victor, claiming they showed obsession, not evidence. Ingrid's testimony was pivotal. She spoke of Nora's growing fear, her regret for trusting Victor. She produced a letter Nora had mailed to her, dated September 5, warning that Victor had asked to borrow money and seemed too interested in her finances. The jury was swayed. Their verdict delivered on June 3, 2017. Victor Hale was convicted of first-degree murder and sentenced to life without parole. Blackthorn mourned Nora. The lodge shuddered, its sign fading in the rain. Lucas kept her bracelet, wearing it as a reminder of her strength. Yet, in the pines, whispers lingered. A hiker found a buried knife near the lodge, its blade rusted but sharp. Was Victor alone, or had someone in Blackthorn helped him? The town carried on, its secrets buried deep, like roots beneath the forest floor that in the rolling hills of County Galway, Ireland. The village of Hollow Hill was a place where the wind carried the scent of peat and the echoes of old ballads. By the autumn of 2018, its population of just over 1,500 lived in a scattering of stone cottages, their roofs mossy from years of damp. The village was anchored by a single pub, the Crooked Thorn, a church with a lopsided steeple, and a market square where farmers traded stories as often as goods. Hollow Hill was the kind of place where everyone knew your business, where secrets were shared over pints or whispered in confessionals. But in 2018, a darkness would settle over the village, one that would unravel its tightly woven fabric and leave its people questioning who they could trust. The heart of this story was Siobhan Kelly, a 45-year-old schoolteacher who had lived in Hollow Hill her entire life. Siobhan was a slight woman with dark curls and hazel eyes that seemed to hold both warmth and a trace of melancholy. She taught history at the village's small primary school, her lessons filled with tales of Celtic warriors and famine ships. That captivated her students. Siobhan was a widow. Her husband, Declan, had died in a fishing accident off the Galway coast in 2011, leaving her to raise their daughter, Aisling, alone. Aisling, now 20, was studying art in Dublin but returned home often, her vibrant energy a contrast to her mother's quiet strength. Siobhan's cottage on the edge of the village, with its blue door and wildflower garden, was a haven, its hearth always warm, its shelves lined with books and sketches Aisling had made as a child. But Siobhan's closest friend was Fiona Burke, a 48-year-old baker who ran the village's only bakery, known for its soda bread and treacle tarts. Fiona was a broad-shouldered woman with a booming laugh and a habit of slipping extra scones into Siobhan's bag. The two had been inseparable since their school days, sharing secrets over tea and supporting each other through life's storms. Fiona had been there when Declan died, helping Siobhan navigate her grief, and she doted on Aisling, treating her like a niece. But Fiona had her own burdens, a failed marriage, a son who'd moved to London and rarely called, and a bakery struggling under rising costs. In the spring of 2018, a newcomer arrived in Hollow Hill, Liam Doyle, a 38-year-old writer from Cork. Liam was wiry, with sharp features and a mop of chestnut hair that fell into his eyes. He rented a small flat above the post office, claiming he'd come to Hollow Hill to work on a novel inspired by the region's folklore. His arrival sparked curiosity. Strangers were rare, and Liam's quick wit and stories of city life made him a magnet at the Crooked Thorn. He'd buy rounds for the locals, spinning tales of banshees and fairy mounds, and soon became a regular at Siobhan's history lessons, where he'd sit in the back, taking notes. Siobhan found his interest flattering, and their conversations stretched late into the evening, often at her cottage over glasses of whiskey. By summer, Liam had woven himself into Hollow Hill's fabric. He helped Fiona at the bakery during the morning rush, carried crates for the market vendors, and even joined the church choir, though his singing was more enthusiastic than tuneful. Siobhan, who'd kept her heart guarded since Declan's death, began to soften. Liam would leave handwritten notes on her desk, quotes from Yeats or snippets of his novel, and she'd blush when reading them. Fiona noticed the change in her friend, the way Siobhan's eyes lit up when Liam's name was mentioned, but she was wary. "He's a charmer, Siobhan," she said one afternoon, kneading dough in the bakery. "But charmers don't always stay." Siobhan laughed, insisting Liam was just a friend, but her fingers lingered on the notes he left. Aisling, home for the summer, was less convinced. She found Liam's attention to her mother excessive, his questions about their family, Declan's accident, Siobhan's savings, too probing. One evening in July, she caught Liam in the cottage's attic, rifling through old boxes of Declan's fishing gear. He claimed he was looking for local artifacts for his novel, but Aisling's unease grew. She told Siobhan, who brushed it off, saying Liam was curious, nothing more. But Aisling noticed her mother's behavior shifting. Siobhan stopped attending choir practice, canceled plans with Fiona, and began locking her study, where she kept her financial records. In August, strange incidents unsettled Hollow Hill. The church's collection box was emptied, though no lock was broken. A farmer reported tools missing from his shed. Siobhan's garden, once her pride, grew wild, its roses choked by weeds. Fiona, worried, confronted Siobhan, who admitted she'd lent Liam 5,000 euros for research trips. Fiona was livid, warning Siobhan about scams, but Siobhan grew defensive, saying she trusted Liam. Aisling, overhearing, checked her mother's bank statements and found withdrawals totaling 12,000 euros, all transferred to an account labeled LD. She confronted Liam at the pub, demanding answers, but he laughed it off, calling it a misunderstanding. On September 15, 2018, Fiona stopped by Siobhan's cottage with a fresh loaf of bread, but the blue door was ajar, the house silent. Inside, the air was heavy, the furniture untouched. A half-finished cup of tea sat on the kitchen table, its surface clouded with neglect. Fiona called Siobhan's name, her voice echoing in the empty rooms. In the study, she found Siobhan's desk in disarray, papers scattered, a drawer forced open. A note in Siobhan's handwriting read, "Liam says it's for the book. I don't know anymore." Fiona's heart sank. She called Aisling, who was in Dublin, and then the Garda Síochána. Inspector Eamon Walsh, a 55-year-old veteran with a weathered face and a calm demeanor, arrived with Constable Orla Brennan. They noted signs of a struggle, a toppled chair, a broken vase. In the backyard, near the garden, Brennan spotted a patch of disturbed soil beneath a pile of stones. The forensic team was summoned, and by nightfall, they uncovered Siobhan Kelly's body wrapped in a burlap sack. Her face was bruised, her neck marked by strangulation. The coroner later determined she'd been dead for 4 days, killed on September 11th by manual strangulation, with traces of a sedative in her system. Hollow Hill was shattered. Siobhan was the village's soul, her kindness a thread in its tapestry. Aisling returned, her grief laced with rage, vowing to find her mother's killer. The Garda focused on Liam Doyle, who'd vanished the day after Siobhan's estimated time of death. His flat was empty, his laptop and notebooks gone, but a search revealed a hidden envelope containing Siobhan's bank card and a forged check for 10,000 euros. A neighbor, old Mr. Connolly, reported seeing Liam leave Siobhan's cottage late on September 10th, carrying a heavy bag. The investigation deepened. Liam's car, a battered Ford, was found abandoned near the cliffs of Maher, its trunk stained with Siobhan's blood. Bank records confirmed the 12,000 euro transfers to an account in Liam's name, withdrawn in cash. A dive into his past revealed he was no writer but Liam Donovan, a con man with a history of fraud in Cork and Limerick. He'd targeted widows and small businesses, charming his way into their trust before disappearing with their money. Siobhan had been his latest mark, her savings, and a 150,000 euro life insurance policy, naming Aisling as beneficiary. His prize, Fiona, provided a key clue. She recalled Siobhan mentioning a confrontation with Liam on September 9th, when she'd questioned him about the missing money. Siobhan had threatened to go to the Garda, and Liam had grown agitated, storming out. A search of Liam's email, accessed through a recovered phone, revealed messages to an unknown contact about finishing the job and heading to Belfast. The sedative in Siobhan's system matched a prescription Liam had filled in Cork, claiming it was for insomnia. But on September 25th, Liam was arrested in a Belfast hostel, his bag stuffed with cash and Siobhan's pearl earrings, a gift from Declan. He claimed Siobhan had given him the money and jewelry, insisting their argument was minor. But forensic evidence, her blood on his boots, soil from her garden on his jacket, told a different story. The trial began in June 2019. The prosecution portrayed Liam as a predator who'd seduced Siobhan to steal her savings, killing her when she threatened to expose him. They presented the emails, the forged check, and Aisling's testimony about it. Finding a sketch Siobhan had made of Liam, captioned, "I was wrong to trust him." The defense argued the evidence was circumstantial, suggesting a local thief, pointing to the church and shed thefts as the culprit. They claimed Siobhan's death was an accident, perhaps a fall during an argument. But Fiona's testimony sealed Liam's fate. She produced a letter Siobhan had slipped into her mailbox, dated September 10th, warning that Liam had threatened her when she confronted him. The jury convicted Liam Donovan of murder on July 5th, 2019, sentencing him to life without parole. Hollow Hill mourned Siobhan, her cottage left empty, its garden reclaimed by weeds. Aisling kept her mother's earrings, wearing them as a reminder of her love. Yet, whispers persisted. A farmer found a buried knife near the church, its handle etched, with initials not matching Liam's. Was he alone, or had someone in Hollow Hill known his plans? The village carried on, its songs quieter, its secrets buried deep in the peat. In the windswept plains of western Nebraska, the town of Dust Hollow was a speck of life amid endless fields of wheat and sorghum. By the autumn of 2020, its population barely reached 1,200, a dwindling community of farmers, mechanics, and retirees who clung to a way of life eroded by time and economic tides. The town's heart was its grain elevator, a towering silhouette against the prairie sky, and its soul was the Lantern Inn, a weathered roadside motel with a flickering sign that promised rest for the weary. Dust Hollow was a place where strangers passed through quickly, their taillights fading into the dusk, but for those who stayed, secrets took root like stubborn weeds. In 2020, one such secret would bloom into a tragedy that would haunt the town for years. The center of this story was Abigail "Abby" Thornton, a 50-year-old widow who had owned the Lantern Inn since her husband, Samuel, died of a heart attack in 2015. Abby was a sturdy woman with weathered hands, crow's feet framing her gray eyes, and auburn hair she kept in a practical bun. She was known for her quiet strength, greeting guests with a nod and a pot of coffee that never seemed to run dry. The inn, with its creaky floors and faded floral wallpaper, was Abby's lifeline, a legacy she maintained with fierce pride despite its sagging roof and outdated plumbing. She lived in a small apartment behind the front desk, her walls adorned with photos of Samuel and their son, Ethan, who was 24 and working as a mechanic in Lincoln, 100 miles away. Abby's closest ally was Ruth Carver, a 53-year-old widow who ran the town's only diner, Ruth's Place, across the highway. Ruth was a wiry woman with a sharp tongue and a knack for remembering every customer's order. She and Abby had bonded over their shared losses, spending evenings at the inn's bar, swapping stories over glasses of bourbon. Ruth's daughter, Lila, 27, had moved to Denver years ago, leaving Ruth to pour her energy into the diner and her friendship with Abby. Ethan, when he visited, often joined them, his easy laugh a rare bright spot in Abby's world. But he noticed his mother's growing weariness, the way her shoulders slumped when she thought no one was watching. In the spring of 2020, a newcomer arrived in Dust Hollow, Elias Reed, a 42-year-old drifter who claimed to be a freelance journalist, researching rural America's decline. Elias was tall, with a lean frame, piercing blue eyes, and a scar above his left eyebrow that he never explained. He checked into the Lantern Inn, renting room 7 for a month, his duffel bag and typewriter, the only signs of his trade. Elias was charming, with a slow drawl and a habit of tipping generously, which won over the locals at Ruth's Place. He'd sit at the inn's bar, typing notes or asking Abby about Dust Hollow's history, the Dust Bowl days, the failed railroad, the families who'd left. Abby, flattered by his interest, began sharing stories of her childhood, of Samuel's dreams for the inn, and of the town's slow fade. By summer, Elias had become a fixture. He helped Abby fix a leaky faucet, carried crates for Ruth at the diner, and even joined the town's volunteer fire brigade, earning nods of approval from the skeptical farmers. Abby found herself drawn to him, his quiet intensity a contrast to her solitary routine. He'd leave wildflowers on the front desk, picked from the roadside, and Abby would blush, tucking them into a vase. Ruth, however, was uneasy. She'd seen Elias linger too long at the inn's ledger, his questions about Abby's finances too pointed. "He's got no roots, Abby," Ruth said one evening, scrubbing a skillet in the diner's kitchen. "What's he really chasing out here?" Abby dismissed her concerns, saying Elias was just curious, but her voice wavered. Ethan, home for a weekend in July, noticed the change in his mother. She seemed lighter, humming old country tunes as she cleaned, but he caught Elias watching her from the shadows of the inn's porch, his gaze calculating. Ethan confronted him, asking why he was so interested in Abby's life. Elias laughed, saying he was just gathering stories, but Ethan found a notebook in Elias's room, left open during a repair job, that contained detailed notes about Abby's bank accounts, the inn's mortgage, and a life insurance policy Samuel had taken out, worth $300,000, with Abby as the beneficiary. Ethan told Abby, who brushed it off as research for Elias's article, but Ethan's suspicion grew as autumn approached. Strange incidents unsettled Dust Hollow. The inn's cash register was short $200, though Abby swore she'd locked it. A shed behind the diner was broken into, tools missing. Abby's garden, once vibrant with marigolds, withered under neglect. Ruth noticed Abby growing secretive, canceling their bourbon nights and locking her apartment door, unusual for a woman who'd always left it open. Ethan, checking in by phone, learned Abby had withdrawn $8,000 from her savings, claiming it was for repairs. When he pressed her, she admitted lending the money to Elias for travel expenses. Ethan was furious, urging her to cut ties, but Abby grew defensive, insisting Elias was a friend. And on October 3rd, 2020, Ruth stopped by the inn with a pie, hoping to coax Abby into talking. The lobby was empty, the coffee pot cold. She called Abby's name, but only the wind answered, rattling the inn's loose shutters. In Abby's apartment, Ruth found a toppled chair, a broken mug, and a ledger open to a page showing a $10,000 transfer to an account labeled YAR. A note in Abby's handwriting read, "Elias says it's temporary." "I'm scared." Ruth's heart raced. She called Ethan, who drove from Lincoln, and then Sheriff Clara Hensley, a 48-year-old with a no-nonsense demeanor who'd known Abby since childhood. Hensley and Deputy Tom Vega arrived, noting signs of a struggle, scratches on the apartment's doorframe, a blood smear on the wall. In the inn's backyard, near a row of pines, Vega spotted a patch of disturbed soil, hastily covered with leaves. The forensic team unearthed Abby Thornton's body, wrapped in a tarp. Her skull was fractured, likely from a wrench, and her wrist showed ligature marks. The coroner estimated she'd been dead for 3 days, killed on September 30th, with traces of a sedative in her system. Dust Hollow was stunned. Abby was the town's anchor, her in a refuge for travelers and locals alike. Ethan, devastated, moved back to help with the investigation, his grief fueling his resolve. Hensley focused on Elias Reed, who'd vanished the day after Abby's death. His room was empty, his typewriter gone, but a search revealed a hidden compartment in his duffel bag containing Abby's bank card and a forged loan agreement for $15,000. A farmer, Old Man Jenkins, reported seeing Elias leave the inn late on September 29th, carrying a heavy sack. The investigation uncovered Elias's true identity. Elias Ramsey, a con man with a rap sheet in Iowa and Kansas, known for targeting small-town businesses and widows. Bank records showed the $8,000 and $10,000 transfers to his account, withdrawn in cash. A search of his abandoned car, found near a truck stop in Cheyenne, revealed Abby's blood and a wrench with her DNA. Emails on a recovered tablet showed Elias planning to head west after a big payout. Mentioning Abby's insurance policy done on October 12th, Elias was arrested in a Wyoming motel. His bag stuffed with cash and Abby's silver locket, a gift from Samuel. He claimed Abby had given him the money willingly, denying murder. But forensic evidence, her blood on his jacket, soil from the inn's backyard, contradicted him. The trial began in July 2021. The prosecution portrayed Elias as a predator who'd charmed Abby to access her savings, killing her when she grew suspicious. They presented the ledger, emails, and Ethan's testimony about finding a letter in Abby's apartment, dated September 28th. Warning: Elias knows about the policy. I think he's lying. The defense argued the evidence was circumstantial, suggesting a local thief, citing the shed break-in as the culprit. They claimed Abby's death was accidental, perhaps during a heated argument. Ruth's testimony was pivotal, presenting a second letter Abby had mailed her, confessing fear after confronting Elias about the money. On August 10, 2021, Elias Ramsey was convicted of murder and sentenced to life without parole. Dust Hollow mourned Abby. The inn shuttered, its sign dark. Ethan kept her locket, a reminder of her warmth. Yet, whispers lingered. A hunter found a buried knife near the grain elevator, its blade etched with unfamiliar initials. Had Elias acted alone, or did Dust Hollow hide another secret? The town carried on, its fields whispering in the wind, its truths buried deep in the rugged foothills of eastern Kentucky. The town of Ravens Hollow was a place where the mountains held secrets as old as the coal veins beneath them. By the autumn of 2021, its population had dwindled to just under 1,800, a community of miners, shopkeepers, and families bound by a shared history of hardship. The town's pulse was its general store, a weathered building with creaking floors, and shelves stocked with canned goods and dreams of better days. At its edge stood the Hollow Moon Tavern, a dimly lit refuge where locals drowned their sorrows in bourbon and bluegrass. Ravens Hollow was a place where trust was hard-earned, and secrets were guarded like heirlooms. In 2021, one such secret would unravel the town's fragile bonds, leaving a scar that would linger in the shadow of the pines. At the heart of this story was Eleanor Ellie Vance, a 49-year-old widow who had run the Hollow Moon Tavern since. Her husband, Caleb, died in a mine collapse in 2014. Ellie was a wiry woman with coal dark eyes and chestnut hair streaked with gray, always tied back with a faded bandana. Her hands, calloused from years of pouring drinks and scrubbing tables, told a story of resilience, and her sharp wit kept rowdy patrons in line. The tavern, with its scarred wooden bar and walls plastered with old mining photos, was Ellie's sanctuary, a place where she could lose herself in the rhythm of serving drinks and swapping stories. She lived in a small apartment above the tavern, its windows overlooking the misty hills, and kept a ledger of every transaction, her neat handwriting a testament to her need for control in a life marked by loss. Ellie's closest companion was Marla Hensley, a 52-year-old seamstress who ran a tailoring shop next to the general store. Marla was a stout woman with a warm smile and a habit of humming gospel tunes while she worked. She and Ellie had grown up together, their friendship forged in schoolyard games and shared grief after Caleb's death. Marla's husband had left her years ago, and her only son, Jonah, 25, had moved to Lexington to work as a paramedic, leaving her to stitch quilts and mend clothes alone. She'd stop by the tavern most evenings, bringing homemade cornbread and listening as Ellie vented about late suppliers or rowdy customers. Jonah, when he visited, was protective of Ellie, treating her like a second mother, but he worried about her isolation. the way she seemed to carry the weight of the town on her shoulders. In the spring of 2021, a stranger arrived in Ravens Hollow. Gideon Holt, a 39-year-old carpenter who claimed he was passing through, looking for work after a stint in West Virginia. Gideon was broad-shouldered, with a weathered face, sandy hair, and a quiet intensity that drew eyes at the tavern. He rented a room at the Hollow Moon, paying in cash, his toolbox, and a worn leather journal his only possessions. Gideon was quick to charm, helping locals with odd jobs, fixing a porch, building a fence, and sharing stories of his travels over beers at the bar. He took a particular interest in Ellie, offering to repair the tavern's sagging roof for a discount. She accepted, grateful for the help, and soon Gideon was a regular presence, hammering nails by day and lingering at the bar by night. His gaze fixed on Ellie as she poured drinks. By summer, Gideon had woven himself into Ravens Hollow. He joined the volunteer fire crew, helped Marla move heavy bolts of fabric, and even carved a wooden sign for the general store. Ellie found herself softening, his steady presence a balm after years of solitude. He'd leave small gifts on the bar, a whittled bird, a bouquet of wild mint, and Ellie would smile, tucking them away in her apartment. Marla, however, was skeptical. She noticed Gideon's questions about Ellie's finances, the way he lingered over the tavern's ledger. When Ellie wasn't looking, "He's too good to be true, Ellie," Marla said one evening, threading a needle in her shop. "What's a drifter doing in a place like this?" Ellie laughed, insisting Gideon was just kind, but her hands trembled as she poured Marla's tea. Jonah, home for a weekend in July, sensed trouble. He caught Gideon in the tavern's basement, rummaging through old crates of Caleb's mining gear. Gideon claimed he was looking for tools, but Jonah noticed a missing photo from the bar's wall, a picture of Ellie and Caleb taken before the collapse. He told Ellie, who dismissed it as an accident, but Jonah's unease grew. He checked the tavern's books and found discrepancies, small sums missing, totaling $3,000 over months. When he confronted Ellie, she admitted lending Gideon $2,000 for supplies, saying he'd promised to repay her. Jonah urged her to be cautious, but Ellie grew defensive, insisting she could trust him. As autumn settled over Ravens Hollow, strange incidents stirred unease. The general store's cash box was short $100, though the lock was intact. A shed behind the tavern was broken into, tools gone. Ellie's garden, once lush with herbs, wilted under early frost. Marla noticed Ellie growing secretive, locking her apartment and canceling their cornbread nights. Jonah, calling from Lexington, learned Ellie had withdrawn $7,000 from her savings, claiming it was for tavern repairs. When pressed, she admitted giving the money to Gideon for a business venture he'd pitched, a plan to expand the tavern into a bed and breakfast. Jonah was furious, demanding she cut ties, but Ellie's voice cracked, saying Gideon was her chance to start over. On October 10, 2021, Marla stopped by the tavern with a quilt for Ellie, but the bar was empty, the jukebox silent. She called Ellie's name, her voice echoing in the dim light. In the apartment upstairs, she found a toppled stool, a shattered glass, and the ledger open to a page showing a $9,000 transfer to an account labeled GH. A note in Ellie's handwriting read, "Gideon says it's for us." I don't believe him anymore. Marla's chest tightened. She called Jonah, who sped from Lexington, and then Sheriff Amos Tate, a 60-year-old with a grizzled beard and a reputation for fairness. Tate and Deputy Lila Morgan arrived, noting signs of a struggle, scratches on the apartment's door, a blood smear on the wall. In the backyard, near a cluster of pines, Morgan found a patch of disturbed soil hidden under a tarp. The forensic team unearthed Ellie Vance's body, wrapped in a blanket. Her skull was fractured, likely from a hammer, and her wrists bore ligature marks. The coroner estimated she'd been dead for 4 days, killed on October 6th, with sedatives in her system. Raven's Hollow was shattered. Ellie was the town's spirit, her tavern a refuge. Jonah, consumed by guilt, vowed to find her killer. Tate focused on Gideon Holt, who'd vanished the day after Ellie's death. His room was empty, his toolbox gone, but a search revealed a hidden envelope with Ellie's bank card and a forged check for $5,000. A neighbor, Mrs. Dorsey, saw Gideon leave the tavern late on October 5th, carrying a heavy bag. The investigation revealed Gideon's true identity. Gideon Hayes, a con man with a history of fraud in Ohio and Tennessee, targeting small-town businesses and widows. Bank records showed the $7,000 and $9,000 transfers to his account, withdrawn in cash. His abandoned truck, found near a West Virginia border town, had Ellie's blood in the bed. Emails on a recovered phone showed Gideon planning to move on after a final job, mentioning Ellie's $200,000 life insurance policy, naming Jonah as beneficiary on October 18th. Gideon was arrested in a Tennessee motel, his bag stuffed with cash and Ellie's silver ring, a gift from Caleb. He claimed Ellie gave him the money willingly, denying murder. But forensic evidence, her blood on his boots, soil from the tavern's backyard, contradicted him. The trial began in August 2022. The prosecution portrayed Gideon as a predator who charmed Ellie to steal her savings, killing her when she threatened to expose him. They presented the ledger, emails, and Jonah's testimony about a letter. Ellie left, dated October 4th. Warning, Gideon's not who he says. I'm scared. The defense argued the evidence was circumstantial, pointing to the shed break-in as evidence of a local thief. They suggested Ellie's death was accidental, perhaps during an argument. Marla's testimony was decisive, presenting a second letter Ellie had mailed her, confessing she'd confronted Gideon about the money. On September 15, 2022, Gideon Hayes was convicted of murder and sentenced to life without parole. At Raven's Hollow mourned Ellie. The tavern shuttered. Its sign dark. Jonah kept her ring, a reminder of her strength. Yet, whispers persisted. A miner found a buried knife near the tavern, its handle etched with unknown initials. Had Gideon acted alone, or did Raven's Hollow hide another secret? The town carried on, its mountains silent, its truths buried deep in the cold. In the heart of Montana's Bitterroot Valley, the town of Copper Creek was a rugged outpost where the mountains loomed like silent sentinels. By the autumn of 2022, its population hovered just above 1,600, a tight-knit community of ranchers, shopkeepers, and seasonal workers who lived by the rhythm of the seasons. The town's lifeblood was its sawmill, a weathered structure that churned out lumber for the region, its whine echoing through the pines. At the edge of Copper Creek stood the Red Elk Lodge, a log hewn in with a tin roof and a porch that creaked under the weight of passing years. The town was a place where trust was forged over coffee at the general store, but secrets lingered in the shadows of the forest, waiting to be unearthed. In 2022, one such secret would tear the town apart, leaving its people grappling with betrayal. And lost at the center of this story was Clara Beaumont, a 51-year-old widow who had owned the Red Elk Lodge since her husband, Owen, died in a hunting accident in 2016. Clara was a tall woman with sharp green eyes and hair the color of autumn. Leaves always pulled into a loose braid. Her hands, rough from years of chopping wood and scrubbing floors, spoke of her resilience. And her quiet smile welcomed guests to the lodge with a warmth that belied her private grief. The Red Elk, with its stone fireplace and walls lined with antlers, was Clara's pride, a haven for hunters, hikers, and locals seeking a night of storytelling over whiskey. She lived in a small loft above the lodge, its windows framing the jagged peaks of the Bitterroot Mountains, and kept meticulous records of every guest, her ledger a testament to her need for order in a world that had taken so much. Clara's closest friend was Hazel Reed, a 54-year-old herbalist who ran a small apothecary in town, selling tinctures and teas made from mountain plants. Hazel was a wiry woman with a quick laugh and a habit of tucking wildflowers into her graying bun. She and Clara had known each other since childhood, their bond sealed through shared summers exploring the creeks and winters huddled by the lodge's fire. Hazel's husband had passed years ago, and her daughter, Nora, 29, had moved to Missoula to work as a park ranger, leaving Hazel to tend her shop alone. She'd visit Clara most evenings, bringing jars of chamomile tea and listening as Clara recounted the challenges of running the lodge, leaky pipes, demanding guests, and a mortgage that never seemed to shrink. Nora, when she visited, treated Clara like family, but she worried about her mother's friend, noticing the lines of exhaustion etched into Clara's face. In the spring of 2022, a newcomer arrived in Copper Creek. Silas King, a 40-year-old surveyor, who claimed he was mapping the valley for a land development firm. Silas was lean, with a weathered face, dark eyes, and a faint limp he attributed to a fall in the Rockies. He checked into the Red Elk Lodge, renting room 9 for an extended stay, his survey equipment and a worn notebook his only possessions. Silas was charming, with a gravelly voice and a knack for spinning tales of his travels through Wyoming and Idaho. He'd linger at the lodge's bar, buying drinks for locals and asking about the town's history, the old copper mines, the families who'd settled the valley. Clara took a liking to him, offering him a discounted rate and sharing stories of Owen's hunting trips or the lodge's early days. Silas, in turn, praised her strength, leaving small gifts, a carved wooden elk, a bundle of sage, on the front desk at BY Summer. Silas had become a familiar face in Copper Creek. He helped repair the lodge's fence, hauled supplies for Hazel's shop, and joined the town's annual harvest festival, winning over skeptics with his easy grin. Clara found herself drawn to him, his steady presence easing the loneliness she'd carried since Owen's death. He'd sit with her on the porch, at dusk, sketching maps of the valley while she spoke of her dreams to expand the lodge. Hazel, however, was wary. She noticed Silas's questions about Clara's finances, her savings, the lodge's deeds, were too pointed, his interest in the ledger too keen. "He's got no ties here, Clara," Hazel said one afternoon, grinding herbs in her shop. "What's a surveyor doing in a dying town like this?" Clara laughed, insisting Silas was harmless, but her fingers fidgeted with the sage he'd given her. Nora, home for a weekend in July, sensed trouble. She caught Silas in the lodge's attic, rifling through old boxes of Owen's hunting gear. He claimed he was looking for maps of the valley, but Nora noticed a missing photo from the bar, a picture of Clara and Owen, taken on their wedding day. She told Clara, who brushed it off as a mistake, but Nora's suspicion grew. She checked the lodge's books and found discrepancies, small sums missing, totaling $4,000 over months. When she confronted Clara, her mother's friend admitted lending Silas $3,000 for survey equipment, saying he'd promised to repay her. Nora urged caution, but Clara grew defensive, insisting Silas was a friend who understood her. As autumn painted the mountains in gold and crimson, strange incidents unsettled Copper Creek. The general store's cash drawer was short $150, though the lock was untouched. A shed behind the lodge was broken into, tools missing. Clara's garden, once vibrant with lavender, withered under early snow. Hazel noticed Clara growing secretive, locking her loft and canceling their tea nights. Nora, calling from Missoula, learned Clara had withdrawn $6,000 from her savings, claiming it was for lodge repairs. When pressed, Clara admitted giving the money to Silas for a land deal he'd proposed. a plan to sell part of the lodge's property to developers. Nora was furious, demanding Clara end contact. But Clara's voice trembled, saying Silas was her chance for a new start. On October 8, 2022, Hazel stopped by the lodge with a jar of tea, but the bar was silent, the fireplace cold. She called Clara's name, her voice swallowed by the creaking pines outside. In the loft, she found a toppled lamp, a broken mug, and the ledger open to a page showing an $8,000 transfer to an account labeled Escape. A note in Clara's handwriting read, "Silas says it's for the future. I don't trust him anymore." Hazel's heart pounded. She called Nora, who drove from Missoula, and then Sheriff Daniel Boone, a 57-year-old with a grizzled face and a reputation for dogged persistence. Boone and Deputy Sarah Lyle arrived, noting signs of a struggle, scratches on the loft's door, a blood smear on the wall. In the backyard, near a cluster of pines, Lyle found a patch of disturbed soil hidden under a pile of branches. The forensic team unearthed Clara Beaumont's body, wrapped in a canvas sheet. Her skull was fractured, likely from a crowbar, and her wrist showed ligature marks. The coroner estimated she'd been dead for 3 days, killed on October 5th, with sedatives in her system. Copper Creek was stunned. Clara was the town's heartbeat, her lodge a refuge for weary souls. Nora, consumed by grief, vowed to find her killer. Boone focused on Silas Kane, who'd vanished the day after Clara's death. His room was empty, his survey equipment gone, but a search revealed a hidden envelope with Clara's bank card and a forged loan agreement for $7,000. A rancher, Old Man Carter, saw Silas leave the lodge late on October 4th, carrying a heavy sack. The investigation uncovered Silas's true identity. Silas Kruger, a con man with a history of fraud in Wyoming and Colorado, targeting rural businesses and widows. Bank records showed the $6,000 and $8,000 transfers to his account, withdrawn in cash. His abandoned truck, found near an Idaho border town, had Clara's blood in the bed. Emails on a recovered phone showed Silas planning to head north. After a big score, mentioning Clara's $250,000 life insurance policy, naming Nora as beneficiary on October 15th, Silas was arrested in a Montana motel, his bag stuffed with cash and Clara's silver bracelet, a gift for Moen. He claimed Clara gave him the money willingly, denying murder. But forensic evidence, her blood on his jacket, soil from the lodge's backyard, contradicted him. The trial began in July 2023. The prosecution portrayed Silas as a predator who'd charmed Clara to steal her savings, killing her when she threatened to expose him. They presented the ledger, emails, and Nora's testimony about a letter Clara left, dated October 3rd. Warning, Silas knows about the policy. I'm scared. The defense argued the evidence was circumstantial, pointing to the shed break-in as evidence of a local thief. They suggested Clara's death was accidental, perhaps during an argument. Hazel's testimony was pivotal, presenting a second letter Clara had mailed her, confessing she'd confronted Silas about the money. On August 20th, 2023, Silas Kruger was convicted of murder and sentenced to life without parole. Copper Creek mourned Clara. The lodge shuddered, its sign rusted. Nora kept her bracelet, a reminder of her warmth. Yet, whispers persisted. A hunter found a buried knife near the sawmill, its blade etched with unfamiliar initials. Had Silas acted alone, or did Copper Creek hide another secret? The town carried on, its mountains silent, its truths buried deep in the pines.